Hello and welcome to Media News Podcasts. Media News aims to be an authentic voice bringing you real truthful stories from the Middle East with a particular focus on the Kurdish question that is often ignored, self-censored or suppressed by the mainstream media platforms. The Kurdish issue in Turkey is one of the denial of the identity of the Kurdish people, a denial of their identity, their history, their culture, language and their right to decide their own future. A people, because they decided not to abandon their identity, were criminalized by the Turkish state and have been subjected for almost 100 years since the establishment of the modern Turkish state to the most brutal and violent campaigns of repression and have included widespread war crimes of ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity. Widespread racist crimes that they have suffered to the almost universal silence of global governments who have supported the Turkish state's brutal suppression of the Kurds with silence and complicity, arms deals, and economic interests that have meant that governments have not fully questioned the Turkish state's preference of framing the Kurdish issue in any other way other than fighting terrorism. This has left the Kurds to struggle mostly alone. However, after the events in north and east Syria, known also as Rojava, particularly the Kurds' legendary defense of the city of Kobani against an overwhelming attack by ISIS in 2004, the world is beginning to recognize the Kurds as freedom fighters and people who share the values of the democratic world in fighting against racism, sexism, and radical jihadist terrorist organizations such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and at the same time fighting for a radical democracy in the Middle East that promotes equal representation, women's freedom, and progressive ecological principles. Abdullah Öcalan, the recognized leader of the Kurdish People's Movement, the PKK, whose ideas guide this progressive movement, and whose fighters played such a critical role in saving Kobani and in the defeat of ISIS, was abducted on the 15th of February 1999 after being forced out of Syria and embarking on a journey to find a peaceful political solution to the Kurdish issue. After many months of diplomatic efforts, Öcalan was en route to South Africa to meet with members of the South African government, where he had been assured political asylum by Mandela's government when he was abducted from the Greek embassy in Nairobi by Turkish intelligence agents and was flown back to Turkey and taken to a prison island called Imrali Island in the middle of the Sea of Marmara, where he has remained in almost total isolation since. This 15th of February, he will be beginning his 24th year of a life sentence, which has been ruled illegal by many bodies, such as the European Court of Human Rights and the Committee for the Protection of Torture. Of course, the similarities between Nelson Mandela and Abdullah Öcalan are striking and uncanny. Both men began an armed struggle against an uncompromising and racist oppressor. Both men began an armed struggle when all other options for democratic struggle were closed down. Both men were jailed and labeled as terrorists for leading their people in a struggle for freedom, and both were held in a top security island prison in total isolation from the world. Mandela for 27 years and Öcalan now facing his 24th year. Many South Africans have traveled to Kurdistan and witnessed themselves the Turkish colonial regime's racist suppression of the Kurdish struggle for basic rights and freedoms. The legendary anti-apartheid campaigner Archbishop Desmond Tutu had sent messages of support to the annual Kurdish conference in the EU Parliament and sent letters to the Turkish government condemning Turkey's policies towards the Kurds. Nelson Mandela himself, refused a prize given to him in 1992 by the Turkish regime, citing the repression of the Kurds in his reasons for refusing it, and has sent messages to the Kurdish people saluting the Kurdish struggle for freedom. Of course, we pause here to remember with such love and respect Madiba, Nelson Mandela, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and of course, to remember with such warm affection and respect Judge Essa Musa, who was a judge in the Supreme Court of South Africa. During the apartheid era, he was active as a lawyer defending political detainees and was a founding member of the Anti-Apartheid National Association of Democratic Lawyers. And he was the lawyer of Nelson Mandela, who had participated in many Kurdish events in Turkey, Kurdistan, and Europe, and had shown such deep love and solidarity with the Kurdish freedom movement. He was also a member of the International Freedom for Öcalan initiative, established for the freedom of the Kurdish people's leader, Abdullah Öcalan's freedom. And his spirit is very much with us today as we talk about these issues. Now, I want to introduce you and to hear more about the connections and the links between the revolutionary struggle of Black South Africans against apartheid and the Kurds, and of the latest international initiative calling for the release of Abdullah Öcalan. We are very humbled and very honored today to be joined by Mahmoud Patel, himself a central, long-standing and dedicated pro-Kurdish rights activist in South Africa. Mahmoud Patel is an academic, a legal scholar, and a dedicated human rights activist. He is the chairperson of the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group, the KHRAG, in South Africa, from where he joins us today. Mahmoud Patel has also served as a member in the Ideology Commission of the South African Communist Party in the Western Cape, after being appointed by the head of the ANC Research and Development Unit. Mahmoud Patel is also a former Umkhonto we Sizwe member. Welcome, Mahmoud, to Media News. It's such a great pleasure to be able to talk to you today. Can we just perhaps begin by asking you if you could just tell us a little bit about the background history of how the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group came into being?
Thank you very much, Mark, and I thank you for the honor and privilege you have given me to share with you on this platform. And to go at the very beginning, the formation of the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group principally was a group of individuals who were briefed prior to 1999 by a visiting delegation of the PKK. That delegation met with the late Judge Essa Musa, the late Minister of Justice in the first portfolio of the new democratic dispensation, Minister Abdullah Omar, and the Director General at the time in President Mandela's cabinet was the late Professor Jakes Gerwel, who was very close to the late Judge Essa Musa. And that delegation, or those individuals, met together to, in principle, as interlocutors, to be part of a welcoming committee later in 1999, when Abdullah Öcalan was forced to leave Syria. And there was an expectation that he would arrive in South Africa, but Madiba at the time said, or the group of founder members of CRAG at the time said that as long as Abdullah Öcalan puts his foot on South African soil or Namibian soil, political asylum will be granted to him. Now, for obvious reasons, South Africa is an important country in the international stage because of its moral higher ground it has for its transition from an apartheid state to a democratic one. But it's not a superpower like a NATO member, nor like the Russian Federation and so on. Therefore, it has more of that moral high ground. So those individuals, or that group of members, Judge Essa Musa, former Minister of Parliament Paulo Jordan, former member of the Communist Party Philip Dexter, Imam Hassan Solomons, who is very well known for reading Madiba's message a while before that to that packed stadium where he gave
Germany.
Madiba's in Germany. That's correct, for the solidarity to the Kurdish struggle and the Kurdish cause and the Kurdish people, where he drew similarities between our struggle and their struggle for freedom.
Yeah.
And when the news came in 99 February, while they were anxiously waiting for any news that Abdullah Öcalan he was kidnapped and then handed over to the MIT or Turkish intelligence operatives or special forces that were there, and thereafter taken back to Turkey to stand for trial in the military tribunal. The news then arrived in South Africa, and that welcoming committee then constituted itself into the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group. And since then till today, it continues the lobbying and peaceful uh, calls for action, as well as lobbying for the freedom of Abdullah Öcalan, as well as lobbying for the authorities, Turkish authorities, as well as the other countries in the region for a peaceful solution or a solution to the conflict that's there, but on the basis of similarities in our experience. So, for example, you cannot expect Abdullah Öcalan to negotiate while he's still behind bars. And we must say one of the stark differences between Madiba and Abdullah Öcalan is we only started to negotiate formally after the release of Nelson Mandela and all political prisoners. Whereas with Abdullah Öcalan, he has even handed the olive branch while still being behind bars on numerous occasions, asking the Turkish state, the authorities as well, let's find a peaceful solution. And he always says he is the key to this. And we know, just like Madiba, he is the undisputed leader of the Kurdish people. So in 99, when he did not arrive, Judge Esa Musa was elected by that group of individuals to chair this new organization. And thereafter, it formally became and constituted as an organization with a constitution, rules, and so on. And for as long as Abdullah Öcalan is incarcerated, the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group is busy lobbying and doing a lot of activism as well as educational conscientization, not only at the higher levels with individuals like the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the late Nelson Mandela, other politicians and struggle stalwarts such as Ibrahim Ismail Ibrahim, and members of the Tripartite Alliance such as COSATU and the South African Communist Party. More well known for giving solidarity is the Comrade Solima Paila, but also with the normal constituents or activists and ordinary South Africans. When protests take place at our parliament for solidarity for the Kurdish cause, as well as pickets and educational forums at the universities, as well as in the NGO sector here with other partners as well who are very progressive. So that particular organization under the leadership of Esa Musa, the late Esa Musa, as well as the former vice chair, who was Reverend Matthew Esso, and other members of the EXCO, has done much to ensure that the ideals that we lived by and do live by continues with regards to Abdullah Öcalan and the Kurdish people. We are not interested in those that have been complicit in their own subjugation, like those who are located in Erbil, the Barzani family, and other groupings. Because in South Africa during apartheid, we also had those who were complicit with
Buthelezis.
the Buthelezis, the Brigadier Opa Xhozos, the Lucas Mangopis, or the Bantustan Babutaswana, and so on. You know, those were propped up by the apartheid state as a buffer
Yeah.
against them and invoking traditional authority and so on. So those dynamics are also here because we have a very difficult time lobbying support convincingly for the struggle over the years. And I'll tell you why. Because of the lack of information and knowledge on the Kurdish struggle. And the late Judge and Craig, as the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group is known, has done much to dispel those stereotypical notions and so on, because there is and there used to be a much larger grouping in our activist formations that looked at the Kurds as being complicit with the United States, especially in Rojava and so on. And to make them understand that that's not the case. Think of the support after the Dellums succeeded in US in 1986 when Reagan could no longer support apartheid South Africa, because they gave military support to the apartheid forces in Angola to fight us. And after that loss in the US government institutions, when Reagan couldn't continue with that support anymore, then suddenly the US was becoming the savior and supporter, you know, through various sanction measures and so on. But prior to that, it was not the case. It was complicit in what was taking place with Pretoria.
So, Mahmoud, that just leads me on to. I know we're a little bit strapped for time, and I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours about this. But for the purposes of this podcast, I need just to ask you the next question, which is so in regard to that influence of governments or influence of international solidarity. Um, how much influence do you think that international solidarity had on the decision to finally release Nelson Mandela? And why is it so important to build a similar network of international solidarity with the Kurds for the freedom of Abdullah Öcalan?
It is vital because, by their own admission, the chief negotiator for the apartheid state at the time, Mr. Rolf Meyer, himself, in a forum when dialogues were taking place with the Palestinian formations here in South Africa a few years ago, to bring all the different groups together so that they can articulate a unified position. And I think that's very important for the Kurdish struggle as well. Our friends, the Kurdish leadership, as well as those that represent the aspirations of the millions of Kurds, should ensure that unity is the bedrock of every step of the way in the struggle for their freedom. Like we understood in our struggle as well in South Africa, unity was vital. Then you had the formation of the UDF in the early 80s and so on. But coming to this question for the international solidarity and the release of Mandela, Rolf Meyer himself said, had it not been for that international mobilization, us coming, making those overtures while they were still on the island, and then eventually the rescinding of apartheid legislation, the unbanning unconditionally of all the banned organizations, would not have taken place had it not been for that international solidarity and mobilization. It was so effective, although it took decades, but it eventually undid the strongest military machine on this continent and the only nuclear power on this continent. The apartheid state had 6 nuclear warheads. Minister Pik Botha, who joined the new government of national unity after 94, South Africa is the only country to have voluntarily given up nuclear arms as a member of the proliferation. So, what I'm emphasizing here is the international solidarity, support, mobilization was what brought them to the negotiating table sooner than later. Militarily, the state could have continued. We were a guerrilla formation that was not a conventional military, and we would have bore the brunt of that had it descended into that. And we also were sober enough or practical in the way we looked at ourselves compared to the rest of the world. You had the invasions taking place in Iraq, Desert Storm, Desert Shield in the early 90s. You had the invasion of Chechnya by the Russian Federation. You had Bosnian genocide taking place at the time. And while we were euphoric in our celebration in 94, the genocide was taking place in Rwanda. So, had this international call for peace, a dialogue, and a political solution not gained that momentum, we could have descended in that context. So, likewise with the Kurdish struggle and this international campaign, it is vital for unity. It is vital that there is international solidarity, principled positions as well, not just for convenience, because it's convenient to be part of something, to call for the liberation and freedom of a people, but genuine and sincere. And that would give the leverage for this movement's success. The international campaigns may continue, we don't know how much longer, or it may come to an end, which we all hope and want that must happen, but the urgency and immediacy of that, we must understand, must be measured with that patience, but persistence. That is important as well.
That is such a strong message coming from South Africa and your experience of your struggle. Mahmoud, can you then please tell us about the latest initiative? I know that Judge Musa was part of a delegation to the Imrali delegation. Would you please tell us about this year's event and this year's initiative that is taking place online, I believe, because of the COVID restrictions? But if you could tell us a little bit about this latest initiative of the Imrali delegation.
The latest initiative in its preparatory discussions and so on has again prioritizes the call for the. Obviously, there is formal request to meet, even virtually, with the newly elected Minister of Justice in Turkey. And as in previous years, we won't be disappointed if they refuse, because that's been their modus operandi for a number of years. It won't shock or surprise us, because it reminds me of the apartheid state that became increasingly defiant and non-engaging towards the last days when they were in power. So in a way, I don't look at it as being disappointing. I look at it as they don't know how to engage because they have nothing to engage with us. What position do they have to engage with us? They don't have the moral position, they don't have the legal nor the political. It's just brutal force and sheer autocratic ideology that permeates through everything they want to do. They're inimical to engaging in a democratic way because they don't understand this. The point is, the international initiative must continue. The as I said, the priority of emphasizing the release of Öcalan is key, the political prisoners as well, because it's not only Abdullah Öcalan, there are hundreds of others. There are leadership of the HDP that are still languishing there. Salahuddin Demirtas is still there. Osman Kavala is behind bars despite a court ruling to the contrary. And Salahuddin Demirtas, by the way, when he was here in 2016 at a conference arranged by us in South Africa, when he left South Africa, a month later, he was arrested, and from then till now, he's incarcerated.
Hmm.
And his incarceration legally makes no sense at all. One doesn't have to go into the intricate nuts and bolts of what the law says in Turkey and does not say. Common sense and our moral sense is enough to tell us that it is a flagrant violation of all those rights. So the international initiative is calling for the release of Abdullah Öcalan. It also calls for political engagement, discussion from the side of the authorities, the state. But linked to that, because he is still incarcerated, the call is to improve his prison conditions and to uphold the rights of political prisoners. That's a first step, calling for that while he is still there. But obviously, the objective is for his release. So the questions that we will or may ask will vary depending on who's asking questions and whom we will be engaging with. Of course, it will have groups, the representatives of the HDP, as well as human rights organizations from Turkey as well, because they are the best to engage with us as to what's happening on the ground there. And we are not there, so we can't make any informed conclusions as to what's taking place. Yes, what we know from the media and our different channels from the activists and so on is one part of things, but what we get directly from them is much more important. And the other aim, Mark, if I must say, is whatever outcomes we have over this 2 days and so on, going forward, besides the reports that will be written and so on, it gives us here in the South, as well as in other parts of the world, to strengthen our solidarity, to share what's taking place, number one, to give the most updated information, as well as thinking as to what is happening in this particular struggle with Abdullah Öcalan, the PKK, the Kurdish people, as well as what the Kurdish civilians and citizens are subjected to by the Turkish authorities in Turkey as well. So those are the broad things we will be looking at. Yeah.
Okay, so and then I believe that there'll be so this year there's going to be an online rally, Freedom for Öcalan, on the 15th of February.
Yeah.
So presumably, people can look out for that. I know in the UK, that's UK time, that begins at 6 p.m. And you can register by going to the freedomforöcalan.org web. Also on the Sunday, I believe there is a protest in London, anyway, Sunday, the 13th of February, to protest against the illegal capture and incarceration of Abdullah Öcalan 23 years ago. And that is at 1 o'clock at the BBC, and there'll be a march to Parliament Square. Will you be having are there any other events that you would like to shout out for, Mahmoud?
Besides the international ones, the emergency committees and so on, and the ones you've mentioned, those are well known in our channels and so on. In South Africa, we've had to commemorate the anniversary, besides having a public lecture and a picket and a protest outside Parliament. And we also used to do a protest outside consular, uh, the consular of Turkey in Cape Town. The embassy is in Pretoria, and with our alliance partners, we do a protest there as well. The last 2 years we could not have, but we did a picket when the restrictions eased up. We're hoping to get the necessary uh, different groups together again, or confirmation. The requests have been made already or been sent out, but we're waiting for a confirmation to say yes, we are available, and then we can say that look, it's on this day and date. But for the online activism that's taking place, whether it's by Twitter, whether it is joining onto a Zoom platform or any other platform, yes, those we also participate in,
Great.
and those we will give solidarity to that as well. And here we will be trying to do some of it on the ground in the traditional way, which
Yeah.
for us is much more better. And
Yes.
to get everybody involved and so on.
Yeah.
We just can't get a date where everybody says yes, this is the date for us. But bar
Yes.
that, we will as usual do something in that way, because what's important in
Yeah.
international solidarity is those who are the victims on that side, when they get these messages of other countries and the people that are in support of their struggle, it gives them a lot of courage, and it bolsters their morale as well. And that is very important. So, yes, there will be something coming out from us as well. And possibly I'll inform you as well, so that you can also share with the others there as well.
Of course, Mahmoud. Listen, I mean, it's obviously such an incredibly important message that you from South Africa give to the rest of the world in terms of international solidarity with the Kurdish people's struggle. I mean, I don't want to finish this interview without mentioning, obviously, somebody who I have personally met during these years. That's Solly Mapela, vice chairman of the South African Communist Party, who the South African Communist Party awarded Abdullah Öcalan a special recognition award. And Solly had said that the South African Communist Party calls for the immediate and unconditional release of Abdullah Öcalan. Like our leader, President Nelson Mandela, Öcalan's ideas and beliefs will not be broken. Öcalan is one of the most important master keys of peace in the Middle East. For as long as Öcalan is in jail, the whole of the Middle East will remain in chaos. And just to sum up, Mahmoud, can I just leave the floor to you just for your final comments, maybe a message to the Kurdish people who, as you went through your long and painful struggle for freedom and justice, the Kurdish people are still in the middle of theirs, and looking for an end game and a peaceful and political solution. What's your message to them today?
You are not alone, number one. Number two, you have support for your cause. Number three, we will not stop in our solidarity with you until you are free, because it is our obligation morally to continue struggling with you until you are free. Remember, Abdullah Öcalan is an icon not only to you, he's an icon to all freedom-loving people in the world. And it is his ideas that will endure a new millennia because he is the revolutionary of our time. Thank you, Mark.
Mahmoud Patel, thank you on behalf of many of our followers and listeners and Kurdish people all over the world. You have been a dedicated human rights activist in support of the Kurdish people's struggle there in South Africa. And we send our love and solidarity to all you there. And thank you so much. It's been a great honor for me to be able to speak to you today.
Thank you, Mark. And to
Amandla.
all the listeners. Amanda. Way too.
Go ahead too. Thank you, Mahmoud, so much. It's lovely to talk to you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Serkeftin.